This week we are back to new comics, which are back. I'm going to read that.
Just keep that one.
Welcome to Panelism, the podcast where we talk about the comics and graphic novels worth having on your shelf. I'm Todd A.
Taylor Trask. Good morning.
Good morning. If our pre-show banter is anything to be to judge this on, we may go off the rails quickly.
But... Oh, I hope so. None of that pre-show banter was relevant at all, so I won't even give it a name check. But it's we're here. It's a lovely Sunday morning, Todd. Let's just say that.
Yeah, I'm excited that we're back with just new comics, just that feeling of like, hey, we bought some single issues. We're going to talk about it. I think we told everyone last week we're going to talk about these two Image titles, Decorum and Mercy, and so it's pretty cool. But I wanted to start off because I texted you this week with what I thought was a controversial opinion, and you backed me up on it 100%. And yep. So here it is. Listeners of this podcast will know you and I are in agreement on this.
Yes, we are.
Temple of Doom is the worst Indiana Jones movie.
Yes, it is. And that's even considering, I mean, I can already hear the people go, wait, worse than Crystal Skull? Yes. Worse than Crystal Skull. And here it is, folks. First of all, if you're in your car or listening to this on your walk or wherever you might be, and you're like, oh my God, no, they're wrong. I first invite you, before you settle into that opinion, go back and rewatch Temple of Doom, and just and maybe even make a weekend of it. Like watch what was the first one? Jesus Christ.
Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Raiders of the Lost Ark, Temple of Doom, Last Crusade. I think it's pretty much understood Last Crusade is the best one. Although if you're nostalgic for Raiders of the Lost Ark, fine. But those two movies are wonderful. But sandwiched in the middle of that is this flaming turd called Temple of Doom. And yeah. I mean, I remember even as a kid watching that one and just being like, this isn't the same. What is this? And
it always held this allure to me, as I always thought this is secretly the best one because it was the middle one in the trilogy. And I saw it sort of like, even though I didn't think in these terms as a child, I saw it in that Star Wars template of like, oh yeah, it's the badass one in the middle, and then the Sean Connery one's kind of like funny, like it's like that. He's the Ewok of Last Crusade.
Oh, that's a discussion for a different day, my friend.
But I have struggled through Temple of Doom so many times as an adult because as a child, this is the other problem. I was not allowed to see it because it was. I know there's some debate on what the first PG-13 movie was, but it was at least one of the first because of the pulling the heart out of the body scene.
I would say it's PG-13 because of the animal buffet that they had, which is like,
oh yeah, that's pretty gross too.
Oh, that's what always got me as a kid. It took me a while before I made it past that scene to even just see the rest of the movie because I was like, what is happening here?
So as a kid, I always thought like, oh, it's so gross and it's like violent and there's blood and like it has to be the coolest. And then I've tried so many times as an adult to watch it and appreciate it, having come to it so many years after seeing all the other movies in the franchise. And this week, I watched all of them, including Crystal Skull, which I enjoyed again.
Already on that one, but okay.
Anyway, I texted you in the middle of this, where you said, hey, if you said to our listeners, hey, if you before you react, go rewatch it. I would say you don't even have to rewatch it because you might just make it about an hour in, which is all I could do.
Yeah.
I literally got to like the cool part where the thuggy are like performing their ceremony. And I was like, nah, I can't watch this anymore. because because then it cuts from that violent thing to Kate Capshaw being such a dipshit.
Oh my God.
And
she is like, the worst,
so I text
character
you
in the entire franchise.
And you fire that right back at me. You're like, it's 100% because of Kate Capshaw.
And I'm sorry, Kate Capshaw, but Jesus Christ, Willie Scott is the most useless character in all of Indiana Jones lore.
And it's not her acting. It's the character as written.
No, you're right. Thank you. That's a good distinction to make. Because that
right.
Script,
it's not like we dislike her. It's like you can only assume. Like, I mean, well, these are things that are scripted.
Yes, but here's the thing. Goofy. You had Karen Allen's Marion, which was introduced in Raiders of the Lost Ark, had agency. She was cool.
Yeah.
You're like, you can almost imagine her going off and having her own sort of Indiana Jones, like Peggy Carter style adventures, right? Yeah. And it's like, what a great matchup. And then she comes back in Crystal Skull, which is one of the reasons I would argue Crystal Skull is better than Temple of Doom, by the way. But you have this wonderful, strong, amazing female character in Karen Allen. And then the very next movie, you write the most pathetic, whimpering, like whiny, just like everything about Willie Scott is annoying. She was like designed to just, you were rooting for her death like 20 minutes after meeting her. And it's like, oh God. And then on top of that, one of the things I'll mention, we are introduced, and I love, and I'm going to butcher his name, but Ke-Huy Quan, who plays Short Round, and he plays Data in the Goonies. You know him. But like, we're introduced to this kid, like he's been there the whole time. Like he's just Indiana Jones's like little like sidekick. It's like, wait, where did he even come from? Like they explain it a little bit, but they just sort of drop you into this relationship with this kid, and you're sort of expected just to kind of go along with it. And I was like, we should build up to this. I want to like see how he meets this kid, like something else. Like it was a little off-putting. But Willie Scott was the big offender.
I agree. That's all I have to say about it. I'm aware that it's a prequel. It doesn't matter. It doesn't fix it. Like it's that tone difference between her and Karen Allen's character is so. It's just so
Karen Allen is too charismatic. Maybe that's the problem, is that Karen Allen was so charismatic that you're just like, you just wanted her back. And then when she wasn't, you're like, oh, all right. Hey, by the way, it's worth noting, later on, Kate Capshaw appeared with Sean Connery in the movie Just Cause from 1995. So there's a little, makes you think of like, well, what could have been? And you're right. Kate Capshaw, I just want to reiterate, she was a great actress, but that character did not do her any justice at all.
Right. Yeah. It is a good acting job of a terrible character. It's like you meet that character and you think, I did it again this week. I was like, oh, right. But when did they get rid of her? Because I kept thinking like, oh, yeah. She's in it for like 10 minutes and then she comes back later. And it's like, no, they just keep like deeper and deeper. And you're like, why is she still here? You know, it's too much. Anyway. The other topic of conversation I had for you was that we're still living in this pandemic. Reopenings are predictably resulting in more infections, and we're, stuck with a president who doesn't wear a mask and all this kind of stuff. And for the past couple of weeks, I have been viewing this through the lens of Game of Thrones and thinking for 8 years, I was, I shouldn't even say it was that long. At the beginning, in those first couple seasons, I thought, and we talked about on our podcast, how the tension was, we know a natural disaster is coming, and these stupid kings and queens are still bitching about who should be in charge.
Oh my God.
Yes. And I have been looking for the past 2 weeks at like, this is what is happening. The coronavirus is the White Walkers. It's bearing down on us. And the Republicans are the fucking Lannisters trying to like tell the people it's okay. And like, no, it's still cool to go outside. Yeah. Oh yeah. It's snowing for some reason in the middle of the summer, but don't worry about it. And like that has just obsessed me. When I see news, it's just like, oh yeah, another Lannister is opening his estate too early. Okay.
Does that make Bernie the Ned Stark of this whole thing? Like,
yeah, the one that was like screaming about the White Walkers. Well, you know what? Maybe it's Bill Gates. Bill Gates is the one that like on day one of the Trump presidency was like, you need to plan for a pandemic,
Bill Gates was the what's the name of the main guy? Oh God, who was at of the Night's Watch? I've lost all my Game of Thrones vocabulary.
Yeah.
The Night's Watch. He was the original headsman of the Night's Watch. Yeah, the Elder Mormont. I think that's Bill Gates, where it's like, look, because Ned was like purposely done away with so that he wouldn't bitch about stuff anymore. Yeah, it's like there's some similarities to Bernie.
True,
but
the guy who tried to play the game.
Yeah, exactly. He got betrayed. Does that mean then that like, oh man, we could go deep with this? Like, I'm gonna make a list of all the sort of comparisons, and I'll get back to you, and we can talk about it in another episode. Oh my God.
No, that's exactly what I've been doing. We don't need to tarry on that point anymore. People can think of that themselves. I did want to. We have talked about like how we're, in other episodes, like what we're doing and what we're binging, how we're doing stuff. And I wanted to follow up on something we said a few episodes ago about podcasts. And I know we talked about podcasting. I don't remember how much we got into on our podcast about podcasts we were listening to. And you and I always talk about like which app we're favoring, how we're doing it. And a couple things happened in the last couple weeks. One was you pointed me to this site that's partially run and curated by David Byrne, called Reasons to Be Cheerful, and told me, you're like, hey, just don't even read any more news. Just subscribe to this, and it'll put you in a better headspace, which I did. I deleted a bunch. I didn't delete the apps off my phone. I just took them off the dashboard or home screen. So it's like I'm not tempted to just tap on the news first thing in the morning. And I can't say, I enjoy that newsletter. It's still a newsletter, which I'm not a big fan of newsletters. But it doesn't summarize news. It just gives you good stories. But in conjunction with that, I did sit down with one of my with Stitcher, which is my main podcast app, and unsubscribed from, I don't know, more than 100 podcasts or something.
You were subscribed to 100 podcasts?
It's like that. It's that digital clutter thing. And because on Stitcher you can create playlists, or I think they call them stations or channels or something like that. So I would have a station that was like, comedy, science, Trump fiasco, things like that. And then within that, I would subscribe to things. I would subscribe to series of podcasts that I wasn't listening to. It's just like a bookmark, And so I had a way to sort those bookmarks, and it just felt like that clutter that was just in the back of my head. Every time I open the podcast app, I'm like, well, here's 100 things I'm not going to listen to today. So
this is good.
I just did away with it.
This is good because something we don't talk about enough is digital bankruptcy and just declaring it. And like, I do this with my Netflix queue quite a bit. And then I have so many lists of things and I need to probably do it to my Amazon book list because it's up to, I think, 55. And I'm like, I would have to stop. And we talked about this earlier in the year, but like I would have to stop consuming anything new for like 7 years to just catch up on all the stuff on my list. And the anxiety that creates, and also just sort of the stress of like, well, then I won't have anything new, because you want to leave yourself open to just new things that just coincidentally hit you, because that's half the fun, right? But it's like you almost have to just declare a bankruptcy and just start over. Just you're not worried about these things. And the problem is there's too much good content, and there's very few filters or sort of curation tools. One of the things I hope we are is a bit of a curation tool for this purpose, but like it's just so hard to keep it, to prioritize. And it's like, you could just, your entire job every day could just be consuming content, and then you'd still not finish. You'd just find more. Yeah, Netflix is the worst though, because Netflix has their own stuff just gets better and better, along with the stuff that they were licensing that you do want to watch.
It's funny you bring them up, because their queue actually doesn't bother me as much. I don't feel like it's clutter, but the Amazon book thing I totally identify with, because there was a time when I had public book list, private book list, like just general shopping list, and where I went through and was like, I'm not even reading the books I have on my Kindle. I could read what's on my Kindle for the rest of my life, and not be done with them. Yeah. So I think I've done that, where I've declared bankruptcy, deleted the whole list, and then started over. And there's now a fair amount of books, but it's not a dedicated here's 100 books list.
It doesn't feel like work.
Yeah.
Like you're back in college and here's your assigned reading for the next 2 months. You're like, oh my God, I'm not going to get anything done.
Yeah. I mean, it just, it lingers over you, right? And maybe Netflix doesn't do that to me because generally I try to be subscribed to only 2 services at a time. So when, Game of Thrones was on or Curb Your Enthusiasm, I would subscribe to HBO, watch the season, then unsubscribe and resubscribe then to Netflix, So Netflix I was turning on and off. So I needed the queue to just sort of stay there with me. But
well, what are we reading today, sir?
Oh, well, we've been excited for the return of these 2 comics. The first one we'll start with is Mirka Andolfo's Mercy, which is published on Image. We talked about it long ago when issue 1 was out. It is a 6-issue limited series. I just discovered in reading issue 2 that she has sort of designed it to be 2 arcs. Okay. So it's like a short 3-issue arc and then I guess, another 3-issue arc. Mirka Andolfo is the writer and illustrator and colorist, and her colors are amazing. And was the same for a book called Unnatural that I talked about a while ago.
And did she, on Unnatural, did she do all the same? Did she did everything herself too?
The only one I'm not sure of is the coloring, but I think so.
Okay.
I think it was the same creator setup with Image.
I'm seeing writer artist as her for both too. So that's incredibly. I mean, it takes a long time to write these things. It takes even longer to draw them. So it's always impressive to me when somebody just handles both, and especially on a series where it's like they've committed to a release schedule. It's like, hey, June, July, August, September, and sometimes those are created well before, but still, like, just the pressure of that is pretty impressive to see.
Yeah, and she did the same. There's another series which was publishing at basically the same time as this. Like, it's I'm not sure how their schedule got affected, but I think it's called Unsacred. I only have the first 2 issues of that, and to be honest, they're sitting in the to be read pile. So I got thoughts.
Now, are we talking about just issue 3, or are you going to kind of recap us up to this point?
Oh, just 2, actually.
Just 2,
well,
because 3 just came out on June 24th, supposedly.
Mercy did?
Yeah.
Well, crap! I'm behind already.
Well, that's all right. Just want to make sure where everybody knows where we're headed here.
I'm only going to talk about 2.
Okay.
Interesting. Okay.
Unless the website of Image is wrong, which it sometimes is.
Yeah, I'm curious if you could, while I'm rambling, verify that on Comixology.
Yep.
If it's because I wonder if this is another case of like they were hoping to get it to the newsstands on this date. Both titles we'll talk about today, this and Jonathan Hickman's Decorum. The first issue came out literally like the week of the pandemic lockdown starting. So the publication was delayed like crazy until they could get physical issues shipped, because obviously they'd already made them. So when we talked about this before, I'm fairly certain one of the things I talked about was it is interesting. It's an interesting advantage that writer artists have when they're doing the art, because they can sort of they know how to use the art and the language to move the story. I believe I commented on, like, it's sort of cinematic in the way they frame shots, or the way Mirka frames shots, and but I also think that in that original review of issue 1, I talked about how it felt like there were a lot of I'm not sure I used this exact term, but a lot of like little scenes that were staged, that we were sort of jumping from scene to scene, and you're not really sure how to like sort it all out.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very strange, because that was definitely the impression I had on reading issue number 1. I felt like, I don't know how any of this fits together, but there's this there's this one woman in town who is Lady Swanson, who's very haunted by these events in the past that we're really unsure of. And then there's this new arrival in town, Lady Helene, and she seemed, there's something mysterious about her, and it's very like Gothic Victorian kind of thing, and didn't know what to make of it. And when I got issue 2, going back to issue 1 to refresh my memory, I ended up rereading almost all of it. And when I did, it was like I got it. And that's a really strange thing to say. because if that's it's one of those things where it's like trying to figure out the intention of the author, and if that's the intention, that's one thing, and I mean we should probably applaud that and go like, wow, what great planning or whatever, but it's just hard to imagine that was really the the vision,
Yeah.
I think, and this sounds bad, but I think it's more likely like a case of the creator knew where the story was going to go and didn't really like line up the narrative to explain that. And so slight spoilers ahead, but I'm not going to, I don't know how this story ends up in the end, so I can't spoil that much. We realize, you realize in reading the first issue that Lady Helene is responsible for at least one weird death. And you can tie that death back to these events that you see Lady Swanson's husband and others suffering. So you sort of know like she's the key, and her coming to this town is like, that's a big deal. But I guess what I'm dancing around here is that to me, this is one of the detriments of being the artist and writer, is because I think she's coming to it maybe from the art first approach. And so I can imagine that. And so I'm glad that they wrap this up. The sort of afterword is, tune in next issue for the wrap up of the first arc, because if you want to jump in, read those first three together, because I think that'll sort of give you like a holistic picture of whether you like it or not. If you just grab issue 1, I think you're going to be just lost. Like, you're not going to really know. I was in it because I already liked her art. I already liked Unnatural. I thought, okay, I'm going to, I'm buying in. But it does seem to me like it's, I'm struggling not to criticize it too heavily, but I do think the story is suffering a little bit because it's maybe coming from that artistic first approach rather than a story first approach, or a perfectly melded one, and not to, diss on someone else, but I had a very similar, impression of I Hate Fairyland, which was a title that Scotty Young wrote and illustrated. I didn't feel like the story there was disjointed. I just felt like, I don't know that I like his writing as much as I like his art,
Oh, interesting. Which is really interesting because he wrote Middle West but did not design it. So it's you almost get like, which is crazy because like his art, he's a great artist. So it's just interesting that he let somebody else fill in for him on that.
And the artist from Middle West is the artist on Decorum, no? I think, or one of them.
No. I think the artist. I think that guy. I think that guy either did like a limited cover or something. But no, it's a different guy.
Okay. Well, it's we you and I try very hard not to. We don't ever bring up comics that we dislike and want to just like bash them. So please don't take it as like I'm bashing Mercy. I just I really like Mirka Andolfo's art. This is a very intriguing story. It feels very much like it, and I think they can do this. She can do this in 6 issues, no problem, like a horror movie kind of thing. So it's, I'm probably overreacting because I'm only judging 2 issues, and it seems to me like, the intro could have been a little bit more straightforward, which is a weird thing to me. And I don't know how other people feel about that. You can tell me how you feel. Like, sometimes I feel like people are trying too hard to make things mysterious. And if the story itself is weird and magical and mysterious, you can just tell those events in a very plain spoken way. And then it becomes like, oh, I get it. I'm in, like you could have just told me like there could have been narrative, 20 years ago, this, so many people of this town were affected by this, and this is what happened to them. And then when you see Lady Helene leave this body in the snow with the same weird sort of these flower outgrowth, like zombie plant sort of things that grow in these bodies that she kills, I think you would have been like, oh shit, she's coming to town. That's a big deal, But instead you're patching together all these scenes and vignettes, and you're going like, well, how are these people connected? What do we know of her? So that's where I was left. And, I'm happier with the conclusion of this one. But it's and her art is just lovely, and the colors are fantastic. But I find myself like, went back to Unnatural, feeling like, did I have that same, impression of it? And which I didn't. Like, I went back and read a whole bunch of volume 1 and 2 of that in preparation for our podcast today. And I felt like, no, this story kind of, it all unfolded in the way like I could follow, and it was also weird because it's a totally different society, sort of world building thing. I just think in that first issue of Mercy, she's holding too much back to, trying to play it too close to the vest or something. So
interesting.
Yeah.
I'm curious if you change your mind after reading issue 3.
Yeah. Which I definitely will do. And did you verify, is it on Comixology?
It is on Comixology. Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, this is another problem of us. We prepped the show several weeks ago. We knew we were going to do it several weeks ago, and I went, great, I'll get issue 2.
And it just came out this last Wednesday, and
right,
so it's no fault of your own. I mean, and I'd rather you focus on just one kind of issue because I'm going to do the same.
Yeah.
But do you think? I mean, are you going to continue on through the rest of it? Are you going to commit to the 6, or are you sort of, kind of optimistically waiting?
Well, it's weird because I think all the stuff that I've really enjoyed from Unnatural, aside from her art, was Unnatural had this really totally weird story of it's a world that's inhabited by these anthropomorphic animals who are banned from interspecies relationships. And on top of that, there's this weird government program that says if you reach age 25 or something like that and you don't have a partner, the government will find a partner for you. Like they forcibly subscribe you to a dating app to find someone in your species to procreate with. So it had all these weird little, like directions to go. Like it has this, this big brother theme, and also these like sexual mores kind of thing. And then it's this really playful, like pinup sort of style art of these anthropomorphic animals. And it was so bonkers that I enjoyed so much of it. And Mercy it's Victorian Gothic, and that's an interesting genre, but like when it comes to, blood and guts and spooky shit like that, I don't necessarily care for that. That's not.
I mean, the parallels to music and bands is so apropos here, I think, because it's like the debut album from this artist you loved, and then it's like, oh man, their follow-up isn't as good. And it doesn't mean I shouldn't say isn't as good. It doesn't hit me the same way that first one did. Like that happens more often than not in music. So we just kind of need to I think you and I both need to remind ourselves from time to time that comics is just like music, a very creative medium, and the people, especially with indie and creator owned work, like they're chasing a muse, right? They're kind of, whatever they're taking into their life at any particular time often gets regurgitated in their work. And who knows what she's thinking about right now, what she's sort of obsessed with or what she's working on. It's, I've had similar, Hickman's no different. We'll talk about him in a second, but like, I've had books that I'm like, oh, I love it. And then you're eagerly awaiting the next one. You're like, oh, I don't love it as much. And then maybe later on you'll love it more. It's just, sometimes it's as much about where their headspace is as where yours is when you read it.
And I love that you bring up the parallel to music and bands, because it is like that. And I don't feel like, oh, well, I'm, I only liked her first record.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, a little inaccurate because she has a ton of other work. But I do feel like, well, first of all, like kudos to her for doing something radically different than she'd done before.
Yeah, totally.
Or at least something I was unfamiliar with. I know she's done a couple of like fantasy titles where she was the artist. And she's done a lot of superhero work. I think she did some Bombshell stuff for DC. Okay. So, she's got a really wide repertoire. And so I like, maybe Mercy doesn't hit me as much as Unnatural or Unsacred, but like, hey, it doesn't mean I won't check out the next thing. Like I like this creator's work enough that, I'm a fan. So I'm not, it doesn't turn me off. I guess that's what it is I've just been struggling with like, ooh, this isn't hitting me like Unnatural did. So what, what's the deal? So yeah, we had another book to talk about. So you have not read Unnatural, but I have read Decorum.
Oh, you have? Good. Okay.
By Jonathan Hickman.
So first question.
Yeah, we're, it is, it's sort of like just throw a rock at the panelism episodes and you will probably find a mention of Jonathan Hickman.
Yeah.
You are a huge fan, so I love this segue into that because I'm sort of the guy that maybe like listens to him on the radio or upvote some of their songs, but I'm not. I don't know that I'm a fan of this band.
Oh, interesting.
And I think Decorum might. It's funny because the way you talked about it last time, I had not read issue 1 when you talked about it. I've now read both. So, where do you want to start on? Do we just want to jump into 2?
Well, we'll jump into 2, but here's some little context. First of all, this is the most Hickman book that you're ever going to find. And kind of going back to the music comparison, this is almost literally his greatest hits. Like it solidifies my belief that this was intentionally meant to sort of touch every single thing he's been interested in throughout his whole career. And this is also a book that has made me truly excited for comics again. Like, not that I wasn't, but I kind of compare everything to that spring and summer of 2015, where like every single thing Image was putting out was just amazing. It was, books that I've talked about on the show, some I haven't, but like every week was like, pang, here's another home run hit. And then I on top of that just discovered a lot of other stuff, even outside just the week to week. So 2015 was like a banner year for me in comics, and I've always been chasing that. And Decorum has kind of put me back in that mindset. There's quick shout out, by the way, for another book on Boom called Wind, WYND. Issue 1 came out of that as well. I got both of these, Decorum #2 and Wind #1, in the same day. And Boom's, I mean, I've been throwing praise at Boom for a while now too, but Boom is really stepping up and almost like they're truly becoming another Image. Like, I've been very happy with what they're doing too. So Decorum #2 comes out, and the first one, very, like many Hickman books, it kind of takes a little while to kind of understand and get into. And this is probably the most abstract work that he's ever done. Real quick though, words by Jonathan Hickman. Art, really want to shout out Mike Huddleston on the art, because oh my God, we'll talk about that more in just a minute. And I also want to give a shout out to Russ Wooten on letters, Sasha E. Head on design, and of course published by Image. And I would also recommend the physical copy. I think guided view would probably ruin the experience for a number of reasons. I'll get into those as well in just a second. But if you liked unguided view, fine.
I don't disagree with that, and I read it purely on guided view. So did you? Okay. You have picked up both physical issues?
Yes, because this is going to be a collector's item, I think, for sure. But the way it's structured, it is meant to lean in heavily into what, a twofold page, and turning of the page, and sort of like what you take in as you're looking at a page, as you're looking at a panel. Like, you kind of need all of that context to really sort of understand what he's doing. This book synthesizes the elements that appeared through his entire career. And actually, I made a little list just to kind of account for all this. And I was like, man, how much does this dip into? And it's quite a bit. It's got big overarching ideas, and it's less about the on the ground story, and it's more about the big idea, which most of his books do. It has graphic design as a storytelling device, which Nightly News does, Pax Romana does, his recent X-Men run does, with the infographic elements and just sort of like giving you that extra context. He's got a macro and a micro story going on, which damn near all his books have. There's an A-B story going on. So kind of like the recent X-Men series, you're not sure if they're in the same time or different times or how they relate to each other. He's got pages of full text, which just has no illustration, which was used to great effect, I think, in Pax Romana, but then also Black Monday Murders does that from time to time. He's got gunslingers and Western justice, just like East to West. There's plenty of conspiracy, which all his books touch on in some way, shape, or form, so that's present. He's really loving this universal, extra-dimensional being sort of motif, which X-Men played with, his recent X-Men run played with really well. And I'll even give a little shout out to Red Mask for Mars, which is that book that I constantly throw shade on, but you know what? He started doing it there too. He's got manipulation of events and humanity by playing the long game, which Pax Romana does, Nightly News does, and New Avengers does as well. And it's got this idea of remembered consciousness through repeat timelines, which X-Men did too. So it's like he's he's really this. I mean, if you like Hickman, this is the greatest hits of Hickman. I mean, in terms of the themes and the way he, all the things that were unique about his work, his work since the Nightly News, which is his first book. It's all here. It's kind of interesting, and I don't know if that was intentional, or if just a happy accident, or if that was just where his mind was just kind of going back to all the things that he's done that he likes. Either way, it works well. The only thing, and this is interesting, the only thing that is missing, notably missing, is his white character. That
I was going to ask.
Yeah.
Who do you think that is?
I've mentioned this before. He has, in most of his books, he has a character that appears in white. They dress in white. They're often albino. And that white character, I argue, is kind of his dark tower. It's kind of like a unifying field theory of all the Hickman stuff. And whether or not he pays that off, it doesn't really matter. It'd be kind of interesting if he does. I'd like to think that he's got a plan, and eventually towards the end of his career, we'll have a series or a book that just all those white characters will kind of bleed together into one sort of central idea. But it's missing so far. We're only into 2, but it's missing in Decorum. And if it pops up, I'm going to be paying very close attention to how and why and where.
So you don't think it's Cairo, Kai?
No, definitely not. No.
Okay.
No, because Cairo Kai is like an obsidian sort of robotic.
True.
Sort of golem.
I'm just wondering if like when it is born or whatever.
Well, there you go. Yeah, there's this.
Not to spoil anything.
It's very hard to spoil this book, number one.
Yeah,
because
I know. Yeah.
So multi-layered and there's like whisper. I mean, it interestingly reminds me of a lot of Dune, where the first half of Dune is like insinuations and rumors and whispers, and you don't quite really know, like they don't really hold your hand through the politics and the relationships and everything. You just kind of have to glean it. Kind of similar here, where you're just like, I'm not even sure who the bad guys are yet, and not that there even has to be a antagonist protagonist kind of thing. I'm almost imagining he's not. This is very non-conventional. He's dealing with some very high-level philosophical kinds of things here, and so I'm. Oh, go ahead.
Do we know if this is a limited series or if there's an end in sight kind of thing? Do we have any information on that?
The frustrating thing, we do not.
Yeah.
They have it planned up to 6. Yes.
Okay.
No, 5. 5, which will come out in September if the schedule stays intact. So I could see it going either way. I could see it just being wrapped up in 5 or 6, but he's so subtle in some of these stories that I'm just like, man, this should probably be 10 at least if he's gonna get the most bang for his buck. Issue 2 definitely clarifies issue 1, which issue 1 was. It was very much a slow introduction to this whatever's going on story-wise, and then issue 2 repeats some of those elements, so you're not totally lost, and adds even more context, more layers. So you're starting to the picture's kind of starting to come into focus about kind of what's going on. There's the A story is this well, it's hard to tell what the A story is, but
yeah,
one of the
I was gonna say
because they're both sort of equal in terms of their relevance. One of the stories is this ongoing concern of these higher dimensional beings. Maybe they're AI, maybe they're hybrid. It's hard to say, and they're trying to do something that very universal. Like you get the sense that they've been playing this game amongst themselves for hundreds of thousands of years, and they've done this many times, and they've either failed or succeeded, and they have the memory of those failures or succession. So he's playing with this kind of like very high level. There's a lot of that X-Men run that kind of fits into that idea. When you expand humanity out and evolution carries forward, like what do you end up with? And then the other story is this. I think I don't know what she is. She might be an assassin. She might be anything. But Mrs. Morley, who we met very briefly in issue 1, and she wasn't even like the main character of issue 1. That was another female character. So Mrs. Morley gets much more screen time this time. And she's kind of the other story. And so you don't quite know if these are related, if one's a sort of metaphor for the other. It's hard to say. One of the thrills of the Hickman world is that he does not hold your hand, and it's like the sort of the thrill of the discovery is part of the appeal to me. Go ahead. Sorry.
You probably picked up on this, but when we talked about Decorum and we only had issue 1 to go off of, the title page of it says Decorum and the Womanly Art of assassination.
Yeah.
So I really did, I kind of ended up focusing on Morley because of that in the first issue, and thinking, okay, here's our protagonist or our lead character that we will follow through, whether she's the protagonist or the antagonist, who knows. But then the second issue in that same title place says Decorum and the Machinic Love of Religion.
Yeah.
Which I had to look up machinic to verify that was an actual word, which means related to machines. But which is funny because I did not see that when I read the issue. So I went into it like thinking, okay, this is all a story about the decorum of this assassin, because one of the long scenes we see in issue 2 is her having this very polite, discreet conversation with some gentleman where
her husband,
she doesn't really give the details of the assassination, but talks about, did we do a good job, or did we do good, or was good not done today, or something like that. The
interesting thing about that scene is we'll hold that thought, because I want to get back to that, because I want to talk real quick about the art, because Mike Huddleston is, man, just like issue 1, his art is wonderfully diverse. I think he shifts styles at least 4 times in this issue. And when I mean styles, I mean the aesthetic, the style, the illustration, everything about it shifts entirely. It goes from like, very kind of crude, very appropriate, but very kind of crude, hand sketchy kind of, very surrealist art to something that's almost like a really beautiful charcoal, like drawing, almost like Victorian kind of drawing, to something that's very digital and like, very monotone, monochrome. And then it just bounces back and forth, and interspliced through all that are these wonderful kind of classic Hickman graphic design elements, which I'm assuming Sasha E. Head put together on too. So it's wonderfully sort of framed in those, there's chapter breaks and everything, but Mike Huddleston, you can just tell, is just loving being able to do anything. Like you see like, oh my God, I get to do this and this, and this is clearly not a boring book for him. One thing that's interesting is, just like issue 1, he keeps paying homage to Chris Foss's designs from Joe Dorowski's Dune. There's a subtle reference in book 1 that I mentioned last time, actually more than subtle, he basically like copied one of the ships from Foss's Dune, and you can see a little of that pop up in the first couple pages of this one too. I'm curious what that's about, if it's just a pure homage, or if that's sort of hinting at something. Like, I don't know. The fact that this kind of feels like Dune in some ways, maybe that's all. Again, this is Hickman's operating at such a level that I want him to be 10 moves ahead of me at every turn. Right. Like I do not want to get to the conclusion or beat him to the punchline. Like he needs to take me somewhere I never thought we were going. I do want to mention too, you called out the subline on issue 1 and this issue too. Like if you look at the sublines and if you look at the covers, they have nothing to do with the story going on, especially issue 2. Like you've got this gunslinger and kind of a dinosaur and what looks like the Dark Tower from east to west. That does not, you see that environment and those sets, but like that's not the story at all. Like that has nothing to do with the story, and maybe it will, but just don't be fooled. And part of me wonders too if this is like all subversion for, on purpose. Like, hey, we're going to put this here and then give you one expectation and totally subvert it. Again, as the series progresses and more sort of revealed, like I think we'll know. It'll be great to go back and reread all this, knowing kind of where we end up. But to your point about the scene with Mr. Morley, it's the scene where Mrs. Morley comes in and it's drawn in that dreamy charcoal, beautiful panels, beautiful.
Oh my God.
It's to think that the same guy who did the first couple pages did this. Mike Huddleston's a goddamn genius.
I totally agree. And as you were saying that about that, I went back to verify that it goes from, so that we meet this weird religious figure. Well, that's kind of all we know, called Cairo Kai. Then there's sort of a who is, by the way,
who is drawn to look like sort of a obsidian golem. Like he's featureless, kind of like you don't know if it's an android or alien or combination thereof, but it's religious. It's a great description.
It's like in this industrial style. Like it's just, it's very brutal and like sharp lines. And then Cairo goes through something and it turns into like a traditional comic book style, like Ben-Day dots, like CMYK colors. Then we get like this graphic of the hierarchy of the Church of the Singularity or something like that. So that's the only other hint we have about Ro Kai being the head of this church or something. And then it just jumps into the House Morley thing, and it's because of the way that Huddleston changes those styles. It's like you realize just visually, like, we've jumped worlds, Well, this is not the reality or something.
But I mean, we could have jumped time. Like, this could be a scene before book, issue 1 even. Like, we don't know. It could be a dream. Like, it's hard to say. And then in that scene, Mr. Morley actually talks about a dream he had. So it's like there's plenty to make you wonder what that's about. And then you don't even know, like, is Mr. Morley her husband? Is that like a code name? Is it her father? Like, she calls him dear, but it's hard. I mean, he looks older, considerably older than her. So it's hard to tell, what's actually going on. Right. And again, I don't think the details are not the point. The overarching kind of theme and the mood is the point. It's like a really good indie film where it's just it's more about aesthetics. It's more about, the vibe and the overarching idea. And I think Hickman has had enough experience doing big ideas and paying them off that I'm totally willing to trust him. If this was a brand new work by a brand new creator, I would be a lot more hesitant. It'd be interesting. It's very, it's artistically satisfying for sure, but just I don't know if I would stick with it if it was new, but knowing it's Hickman, it's like, oh, he's got a plan. He's going somewhere. It's just a matter of if he's going to be focused on this and get there sooner, or if this is one of those books like Black Monday Murders where it'll just go on, 10 years from now, we'll finally get to issue 11. It's like, oh my God, like that's going to be the failure, I think. The logistics will kill this book long before the story or the execution.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I was not thinking of it in those terms, but that helps focus thoughts I had on this. And it is unlike Mercy. It's something about the tone of that first issue that even though you're not getting this is a place where you don't need a plain narrative to just take you from, A to B to C. It's thrown at you in vignettes and stuff, but you understand, like, this is going to be a vast world, that encompasses so much stuff that I think Hickman sets it up in that way in issue 1, where you go, oh yeah, I'm not going to understand what's going on until later. Whereas I guess Mercy's set up more in like that horror movie narrative of, I feel like you have to have a little grounding so that you can end up being scared later. But Decorum is just so huge. So that has been my concern, what you just voiced, which is, are you building a world and like all these mysteries in it, so many mysteries that you'll never be able to realize that vision? Have you set yourself up for letting us down? But the other thing that occurs to me is in Black Science, one of the frustrations I felt was in the first volume, we get a great setup to the world. And then in volume 2, other things go wrong. And it's sort of like, just like the theme of their dimensions, another layer of the onion is peeled off. And then in volume 3, another layers, it's like things keep getting worse in different new crazy ways. Yeah. And it became exhausting to me after like 6 volumes of like, okay, where are we headed with this? Like I don't necessarily need to keep peeling this onion to realize,
some people love it though. The people who are really into Black Science, I've noticed that the peeling of the onion is the appeal. It's like, keep going, keep doing it.
And there's such like compelling characters. I do want to go back and finish that series, but Hickman, I found myself in issue 2 thinking, I remember in my experience reading issue 1, I was like, oh my God, there is so much reading you have to do with a Hickman book. Like, there's just pages where it's like all of a sudden it's like a huge graphic chart. And if you're accustomed to reading panel by panel, especially in guided view, and all of a sudden something like that hits you, my instinct is like just to punch the button and go to the next page.
Yeah. See, that's why guided view is not. I just don't think that's an appropriate format. Yeah. And I love guided view, as you know, but like this, and I got that sense. I mean, I was going to collect the physicals anyway, just considering kind of what he was up to. But once I got through issue 1, I'm like, oh, you really need that context. You need to sit with it for a while. This is not both 1 and 2 are not books that you just cruise through in 15, 20 minutes and you're done. Like, you almost have to sit with this thing for like a day, 2 days, and like go back and restudy parts. And And it feels kind of echoing, going off your previous point of like the narrative this is absolutely not a linear narrative, and it's not even a traditional comic in that panel by panel sense. It's more like poetry and art. Like he's trying to, it's almost like a dream told via poetry through the comics medium. Like it's much more kind of high esoteric sort of in that regard, at least for now. Now, if we get to issue 3 or 4 and he shifts hard into like a very straightforward linear kind of thing, I'm going to be really confused. Then it's going to be like, well, what the hell is he doing? Like, then it's going to, but if he kind of maintains this cadence and allows Mike Huddleston to kind of do whatever. And that's truly the Hickman collaboration for an artist. I don't think we mentioned this before. That collaboration is so sought after because Hickman will let the artist do basically anything. Like Nick Dragata and he on East to West, like the pairing was, look, I'm going to write this, but Dragata is as much a part of telling the story as I am. And they basically co-authored it. I would imagine a lot of what we're seeing is Mike Huddleston going, wouldn't it be cool if, and Hickman going, okay. And then just trying to like work that in, and we'll see how fruitful that is.
Yeah, I don't know that a collaboration like this survives if they don't do that, because it is, because you've got to have the imagery that backs up the huge ideas, and the imagery is going to inform the ideas because of that. And so, I would imagine it's very similar. Going back to your band metaphor and trying to tie this together for myself, this feels like Hickman every once in a while writes a great single, but then he's got a concept album, and I don't care about the concept.
This is the concept album of concept albums.
Exactly.
That's a great metaphor.
Yeah, and it's like, man, Suburbs is kind of cool, but I don't need to buy the whole whatever that Rush album was.
Oh yeah.
It's so that was another weird experience I had, especially reading these 2 books in 1 week and struggling so much with Mercy, the creator of whom I am a fan, and trying to figure out what that dissonance is in my head, and then reading this and going like, man, Hickman, you've got so much going on and you're not winning me over. And it's hard it's hard for me personally just to reckon with, like, I've had a similar experience with Nightly News and East of West, and although I really did enjoy Black Monday Murders. But it's I just put my, lay my cards down. I don't think I'm going to buy issue 3.
That's okay. You know what? It's good. I'm glad that because it's easy to both be a Hickman like super fan and like run into other Hickman super fans. You kind of get insular in your sort of thinking. So it's good to have somebody who knows what they're talking about be like, it's not really for me, which just, proves that all of this is purely subjective at the end of the day. And you can, there's objective quality, of course, but like, somebody like him who he didn't resonate with you, especially on this book. And and again, it's like, I'm a Hickman super fan. So this for me is kind of like, oh my God, he's doing it all.
Yeah.
Whereas you're like, what is he doing? I don't get it.
I have a weird qualification in that, which is I am so interested in the story of, oh my God, I already forgot the name, of the assassin and the girl who's the courier in the first issue. Yeah. That when I was reading issue 2, I was like, oh man, dude, what would it be like if you just told me a story, like straightforward story? If I didn't have to have like gods and magic and like different dimensions and shit involved, like just tell me that assassination story, because I found myself like weirdly invested in that. Yeah. And so it's not that I disliked any part of this. I just felt like, ooh, this is like, I don't know that I'm going to get the narrative satisfaction out of it that I'm looking for. So I don't know if that's a good impulse to have, and you gotta challenge yourself with some difficult art,
Yeah, but at the same time, if you like something, I think in his argument, he'd be like, look, you can get those stories exist anywhere. And
exactly.
Well done. I'm not doing that here. Maybe he is. Again, the biggest question mark is what's going to happen between now and September, assuming they stay on schedule, like 3, 4, 5. Yeah. What are we going to, I think by 3 we'll know sort of where his focus is. And I think, I'm guessing it'll just be a continuation of this kind of cadence. But he may shift. The cover of issue 3, and it may not have anything to do with the story, so who knows, but like the cover of issue 3 looks incredibly different. And so it's like he may shift shift gears entirely and tell a different.
And issue 2 ends with this splash of issue 3 and says things get weird, and I'm like, oh, they weren't. But you just saying that goes back to the one of our themes that we have been touching on for 5 years, and there's digital versus physical, and there's also collected editions versus single issues. And you know what it is when this arc is done and they put out that first trade paperback, I will read it because I will want to know, okay, how did this arc that I started with wrap up? But that's when I'll make the decision. For me, issue 2 clarified, like, don't bother with the single issues. Wait till the arc is done. Because to me, I guess it's that the wondering if I'm going to be satisfied in the future. That's a hard investment to keep making. So
what's fascinating about that is I have to go the complete, like this would be excruciating having to read in a trade paperback, like, because there's so much, like I need a month to let it kind of wash over me and be like, okay. And then, come back again. It's just, I love that we are complete on different points of view entirely on this. That's good. That's healthy. If we were both like, if you were like, oh, I love it too, just as much, I'd be like, well, okay. But it's like, good art should challenge assumptions and create, different points of view and like all of that. That to me is the true success of this, is that you and I are already 2 issues in, like, well, I don't know, like we're discussing it, in all these different contexts and levels. And I think that's exactly what he wanted.
And there's no denying like Hickman's like inexhaustible reservoir of like ideas and craziness, so I mean, it is one of those things where I recognize the genius of the album, but I'm just kind of like, right now I'm only liking the single, so like let me know later.
Dude, it's a great comparison. Like, I'm a big Bruce Hornsby fan, and Bruce Hornsby has gotten so bored that he is doing his latest album is literally math as music. And it's just like, and it's interesting, but Jesus, it's like, Bruce, I may sit this one out. Like, this is too, maybe when I'm older, I'll appreciate it more. But right now I'm like, man, I just go back to your jazzy jam band blues stuff. Like and he's done that.
Definitely, that was not the surname I was expecting when you said I'm a big Bruce. I was like waiting for any other Bruce Hornsby went sideways for me. Like,
Hornsby is the man, dude. Like he is that's, we'll get into him another time, but like that album is, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I said that album was just like, that was a challenging album. And it's like one that I'm not willing to revisit anytime soon. I'm just like, good luck, man. Good luck.
So, it's so funny because as soon as you brought up the music metaphor and talking about Mercy, and then thinking about Decorum, I was thinking of, this is such a crazy reference, but this, I don't even know how you'd classify him. I would have called him like progressive metal or something, but this band called Coheed and Cambria, that they had this, like, I thought just burner of a song 13 years ago or whatever called A Favor House Atlantic. And everyone would tell me like, oh, but the album's so genius. It's this concept album. He's even got a comic book and these characters. And I was like, tried to give it a shot. And I was like, no, I can't. Just give me that one song.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
Hickman's a challenge, and it's interesting to discuss him for sure. So I'm glad you're getting so much out of this, because I did know from the way you described it. We talked about it on the podcast once before, and then you had read it. I picked it up afterwards, and it was like, as soon as I was into it, I was like, oh, Taylor loves the shit out of this. I know, like, these are all the things you had talked about for other Hickman books.
Yeah.
And I'm going like, oh my God, it's all in there. The infographics and the cult hierarchies, and then like the changing in art and everything. It was just, what a Hickman fan's like, perfect realization of something. So I'm glad
you realized that before we did this episode, because it's
just like, it makes me.
It would have been bad if I was like, I hated it. I didn't like it at all. It's what? How does that happen?
It makes me view Black Monday Murders in a new way, because it has a lot of there's definitely knowing what I know about East of West and Nightly News and this, I feel like Black Monday Murders is sort of an outlier in art and graphic design there. And so reading this makes me reconsider that, I can see this of a piece with East and West and Nightly News. But but it kind of makes me more curious about Black Monday Murders. So, which I have not read, the next volume of. I need to jump on that.
That's another one, man. That's now the last issue came out 2 years ago. And so it's like, dude, that left on such a crazy cliffhanger. And Grant, maybe he's like, look, I don't have it in me right now. And I just did X-Men. So I'm going to do this, get this out of my system, and then I'll be back. I mean, he's just like Robert Kirkman. Those two guys are way too busy for their own good. And maybe that's what keeps them, firing on all 8 cylinders, is just having all these projects they can kind of bounce around from. But Hickman becomes a little excruciating, because he will literally go 5 years in between a series you like before picking it back up again. It's just like, oh dude, come on. Like I need that resolution, or I can't invest in the next one. So I'm hoping, to sum this up, I'm hoping this is a limited series, that there will be some sort of conclusion that at least makes sense in the context of the book, and we'll get there at the end of the year.
Now, are there other to tie this off, are there other new releases coming up that you are grabbing single issues of?
Wind, I'm going to stick around for. Decorum, obviously, and Middle West just keeps delivering. That series is just, I haven't talked enough about that. I'll probably make that a pick maybe on the next one.
Yeah, I don't think we've done one on it.
It's because it's so delightful. Like I almost want it to end before I talk about it, because it's just this wonderful, like the 10-year-old me would love Middle West. And so, I love it now, but it would have been exactly the kind of thing I would have liked when I was 10, 11, 12, and just as accessible. So that's definitely on my radar. And there's some other, I mentioned maybe in the last one, I kind of need to be careful. Right before COVID, picked up a lot of stuff at Escape Velocity's second store closing. And so I've just got, I'm sitting on just a big old TBR pile in addition to the stuff that I'm going to keep up on. So I'm going to probably keep it slim, and, at least for the rest of the year. So maybe those 3 are probably, unless something crops up that I haven't been anticipating. I think at least Win for a little while, Decorum, and then Middle West are my big 3.
Yeah, that's good to know. I honestly don't have anything on my list. So although I know next month, the sequel to the Chew series, which is called Chew, it's just spelled differently. Number 1 of Chew comes out next month. So I'm curious about that. I think it's a different artist. But I haven't looked into it too much, but it definitely is. I just verified. It's John Layman's still writing, but a different artist. Yeah, but I don't know. It's so weird to think of how the pandemic has changed my reading habits and collecting habits, and I don't know. I'm just trying to be comfortable with it, lean into it or something.
Yeah. It's both good. It's good, and because it's slowed things down a little bit for us to catch up on. But it's like I'm just chasing 2015. We can get back to that sort of level of quality across the board. Oh my god.
Yeah.
Anyway,
we definitely felt like too many series you were following got, paused. So,
yeah, that was depressing. That was depressing. Well, you can find many other books and discussions like this one at panelism.inc. That's panelism.ink. That's also our Instagram feed. And we are everywhere. So wherever you find podcasts, Spotify, Apple, Google Play, Stitcher, all of them, we're there. Subscribe, share. If you like this, tell your friends. Tell them about the podcast. Get them to subscribe too. That's how we keep rolling. And anything else from you?
No, that's it. Stay safe. Awesome. Wear the mask.
Wear the mask. Wear the mask.